ads using the product shot that you created last week. And so here's my product shot. What we call it has a path, and we're going to need that path for when we get into InDesign, and basic 3 layers of information. One which contains, in this case, a reflection, but it could be a drop shadow, and the product itself. It is without the product, with the product, without the shadow, and also the background. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the background, and I'm just going to save it. Don't have to delete the background, it's fine that it's just there, but I'm about to import this into my web ad, and I will not want the background for that. I'll want to establish my own background in that ad. Now I think I'll also use this Tilex logo, and unlike that one, it has a solid color background, which I won't want. I will want this logo to be against whatever background I choose to make it. So I could use the pen tool, as has been demonstrated, to isolate this and jump this out from the background. But often when there are other tools for selection, one of which is the quick select brush. And with that, you can just sort of paint the area you want to select. And I want to select the logo, not the background. But it's often easier, especially in a case like this where you have a solid colored background, to select the background and then switch it out. The other one is the magic wand tool, which sort of makes a guess based on tolerance, how much of the rest of this you want to select. So again, this works really well for something like a plain white background and a sharp border. These tools work considerably less well if it's a little bit ambiguous where the foreground and the background of an image are. So in this case, I'm going to hold down my Shift key because I want to not change the selection but add to it. And this works with the paint tool too. The reverse is opposite. If I want to subtract from that selection, it would be the Option key. But in this case, I want to add. So I am going to select that. So now I have the background selected, and what I'm going to do is select and say inverse. So this will select out for me the logo rather than the background. So now that it is selected, I can just say Command J, turn off my background layer now, and now I have it on a transparent background. Now, sometimes it's possible to miss things you might want. So for example, if I wanted the white out of that little registered trademark symbol, I would have had to have added that to the selection. In this case, I think I'm just going to keep that white, but sometimes you don't get stuff, or you do get stuff you don't want when you use those tools. So now I'm going to save this, and it's going to prompt me to create a new file because it has transparency in it now, which JPEG does not support. So I'm just going to save it as a Photoshop document, but you could save it in PNG or a couple of other formats. So we will save that, and then I can close out of it. Now, you're going to be making 2 web ads, which come in the oldest and most traditional web sizes. One is called a leaderboard, and that is extremely wide and very short. The other is the web skyscraper. That's the reverse, 300 by 120 pixels by 600, so it's quite tall. You've seen these ads hundreds of times. And then probably the easiest of these to design is the 300 by 250. And depending on the product you're selling, not all of these sizes are equally useful, but very often advertisers want all 3 in a bunch of other formats. And so some products just look much better in one of these formats than the other, but all you can do is the best you can to maintain your brand and your theme across these 3 sizes. So I'm going to just create a new document, and I want to be in pixels rather than inches, and let's just make the tall one. So I'm going to make the 120 wide. And just like an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, we always talk about width before height, and 600 high. And the resolution here doesn't matter because we're working in pixels. It is what it is. So here is my leaderboard. My skyscraper, and I'm just going to say Command 0 so it fits my screen. And I'm going to start by creating a solid color background. And maybe I'll just start with this. We can select a color, we can go up and down the wheel, but you can also tap in a number, and I'm gonna just make this 0, and you can say tab to advance to the next one. 100, tab 0, and now it's 100% magenta. And I will say okay, and now I can bring in my product. So I'm going to say place, and as always you have the choice between place embedded and place linked. If it's embedded, you're going to bring the data from your other documents into this, but in this case I'm just going to say place linked. And I'm in my right folder, but if I wasn't, we can navigate it. And here is my after image. And I am, because we're in Photoshop, I'm not holding down my shift key, and it will change this proportionally. And you can see that we have the transparent where we're transparent, but also where things are semi-transparent, we're semi-transparent. So with the reflection, I can see the Tilex logo, the Tilex shadow, the pink through the logo. So let's make that just a little bit smaller so we can see the product. And then I could just hit my check because it's where I want it to be. It's not gorgeous, but some of these formats are harder to work with than others. Now I need some sort of call to action or a slogan. Advertisers talk about calls to action. How are you going to get the consumer to buy that product? And I'm not a professional writer, or at least of advertising copy, but I'm going to just come up with a slogan for this product. So I'm going to create some type, and I'll say cleans better. And let's just center this. Oh, it is centered. And let's move this on to my ad. So I probably might want to mess with my type. This is a very narrow ad, so I might want a font that's a little bit more condensed. And this family happens to have that. I was designing an actual ad with this. I'm going to make it a little bit bolder and a little bit bigger. Sizes are confusing in Photoshop. In print, in Illustrator, the size of your font has sort of a direct correlation to how it looks. But in Photoshop, this is clearly going to appear as bigger than 12 point in relationship to this ad, but that's just the nature of working in pixels rather than vector-based programs. So that is too big. Let's make that 10. And the other thing I probably want to do is increase the space between lines, or what a typographer would call leading. And that is, for some reason, in character here. And let's just make that, I'm going to use my up arrow, make that a little bit bigger. So that could be a basic ad. The other idiosyncratic thing about Photoshop is it adds spaces to your alignment. So we have let's make that a little bit smaller. Let's make it 9.5. get rid of that space, because that is affecting my centering. That would not be true in Illustrator or InDesign, but it is true in Photoshop. So that could be a basic ad, and that could be saved as a JPEG and could go to a publication or a commercial website for display. And we've talked about saving for web before, where you hold down Command Option Shift or an S, or you go to Photoshop, go to File, it is a save for web. Well, I will figure that out later and add it to the email, but holding down Shift Option Command or Shift Alt on the PC gets you to this dialog where you can save this to email. Let's hit cancel. But I can also add animation to this. I could make it cycle through a couple things, and then I would have to be saved as a GIF. So let's say I wanted to save this as a animated GIF. I'm going to go to my window, and there's a bunch of things that some of these come up with some workspaces, some of them don't. But the one I want is timeline. And a GIF is just a simple animation. It could look sort of like a full function animation, or it could look more like a series, a slideshow, depending on how long you make the frames of each one. But I'm just going to hit create frame animation, and we have this is a frame, and it is sort of a state. And right now it is set for 0 seconds. Every frame I make is going to be based on the same sort of thing for 0 seconds. So I'm going to say 2 seconds because I want people to be able to see that message. And I could also determine how long I want it to cycle. It can go through, it can play forever, or it could say once or 3 times. I'm going to say, or it could be another number that you specify. I'm going to say 3 times because a lot of websites, that is their maximum number of cycles for a GIF ad. They just won't take ads that cycle any longer because they're pretty annoying. So the other thing to know is that whatever you see in this first frame is, if it cycles a limited number of times, is going to be what the reader sees at first, but since it's cycling 3 times, whatever they see last is going to be what that ad ends up looking like. So it's important that that last frame makes some sort of sense in terms of the message. So I'm going to just duplicate this frame, hitting this little square with the plus button. But now I'm going to make that look a little different. And what I'm going to do is I am going to eliminate the bottle, and I'm just going to replace it with the Tilex logo. So I'm going to say File, Place Embedded, or rather Place Linked. And there's my PS Tilex logo. And there it is. I'll just move it to there, hit my little check mark. And that is my second frame. So one thing that happened, though, is it came down on top of this. Illustrator, or in Photoshop rather, just placed it there for all of these. But for this one, I don't want it to have that logo in it. So I'm just going to turn that off. And that turned it off for this one too. So I'm going to turn it back on. And then that is what it looks like. And so you can hit a preview and see what it does. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make one last frame so that it ends with the bottle. So I'll say boom, and it just duplicates that frame. So I'll say we don't want the logo for that last one, but I do want the product. So there it is. And if I did my save for web, which is those three buttons and the S button, I can now save this as a GIF. And I can also preview it in this panel. So another thing I can do, well, let's make the second ad. And for the second one, I'm going to pick what's called the web square, even though it's not a square. Let's say new. And that size is 300 by 250. And the other thing to know about Photoshop is you can drag layers from one document into another. Let's get this a little bit smaller. So I go down to my layers palette, for example. That solid color I could just drag into this document. And that logo I can just drag into this document. And because this is a different size, it is in there, but it's not appearing. So it's probably, switch to my mover tool. Oh, it's because it's on the lower layer. So let's just move that above. And I can fit that into size. So once you have one web ad, it's easy to make the others. It's also possible to take this ad and save it, which I haven't done yet, and crop it to the different size by setting in a ratio for my crop. If I make this, let's be in this document, and I can make my ratio 300 by 250. And I could just start with this document after I'd saved it, and then being careful to save this as something else. So those are a couple of ways to make a GIF ad. One other thing to know, let's cancel. And you don't have to do this, but it's possible to create frames that go in between other frames. So I can say, if I want a smoother transition, I can pick tween. And make sure I've got two frames selected. So let's say tween. I'll just go with the default 5 frames. And for this, you probably would want a shorter frame rate. It would look nicer if these were not at 2 seconds, but were at something like half a second. So that's what I wanted to show you for this week. Everyone is making 2 web ads. I assume one of the funky ones, either the tall one or the horizontal one, and the square is generally the easiest to make into a nice message, just because it is a more familiar shape. So see you in class.